We're all gathered together today because there is a little bit of a problem, and you probably know a bit about it already, which is climate change or global warming. And basically the problem is that there's too much energy in the atmosphere. So the atmosphere is a bit like you when you've got one of those days when you're really hyper but you can't get all the energy out, you know? So there are storms, and it either rains too much and there are floods, or there are droughts and it doesn't rain at all, and the air gets hotter and hotter. And then there are problems because it's really hard for all the animals and the plants and the trees and the insects and the flowers to live as they have done. And of course it gets harder for us too. So, luckily, very soon, there's going to be a big meeting. It's going to happen not that far away from here, where something can be done about it.
There's going to be people from all over the world, and they're going to be making some really, really important decisions about what everybody in the world can do, because climate change, the heating up of the world that brings floods or droughts, affects everybody, and everybody needs to work together to do something about that. So lots of people are coming together, important people from governments, to come and make decisions and make promises about what they are going to do to try and stop this happening. Because all the things that we love, the trees, the animals, the creatures, the fish, they can't all live in worlds that get wetter or drier or hotter. They can't all adapt to live in those places. What message you want to send to people? What is it that you really, really love and really want to protect? Trees, turtles, fish, dolphins, Isaac, tropical fish.
Seas are rising faster, the climate is warming more quickly, ice caps are melting, disease vectors are spreading, water is being contaminated, coral reefs are dying, and so on and so on. And we in Cumbria here, we are not unaffected by this. We're significantly affected. Our coastline is endangered in several areas due to seas rising and storm surging. Our infrastructure is old and can't withstand some of the violent weather which we expect. But I'm actually quite optimistic. The awareness of climate change has seen a dramatic change over the last, I think, year, 2 years, which I think is positive. On a slightly negative side of that awareness is the anxiety that goes with it. A recent survey showed that of the 18 to 25-year-olds, something like 45 to 50% of them were either anxious or very anxious about the future. And some people are delaying their family plans because of climate change. And that's very sad. But it's unfortunately an inevitable consequence of the fact that we've ignored this crisis for so long. The solution to climate change is very clear. It's very obvious. The sun produces every day 5,000 times, on this planet, it produces 5,000 times as much energy as we actually use. But what we need to do is transition to this new energy. And that's where we all come in terms of telling our politicians at all levels that we're willing to accept whatever pain there might be of transition, and actually it might not be much pain because of all the new opportunities, but we're willing to accept whatever is needed to transition. Now, in terms of locally, as you're probably aware, in this country, 70% of local councils have declared a climate emergency. And South Lakeland, this council, is one of those councils that has also declared a climate emergency. And we're doing something about this. This is not just greenwash. We are actually doing things, putting up solar panels, changing the way we do business, insulating our buildings. We've got a 50-point action plan which you can access that shows that we're actually doing something. We've also helped finance the citizens' jury in Kendal. We're helping to finance CAFs and the A to Z. There are communities throughout South Lakeland that are joining the greening campaign. So there's a lot going on in South Lakeland that we can be happy about. The one thing that I think people sometimes underestimate is the importance that politicians put on public opinion. We can change what Britain does, and other countries can change, other people can change what their countries do by showing our politicians that we insist that climate change is now the most important issue from them when they're thinking about policy, when they're thinking about doing things. We need to tell our politicians that that's the way we feel, and that we're willing to accept whatever it is it takes to transition to renewable energy.
Much like the despondency I feel now about COP26 and with no faith in the outcome, which is tragic, we felt that at the very beginning of the anti-fracking movement, that there was no hope. And we were constantly told, you know, the government has made its mind up. You will not get this stopped. And what you called was honourable, it wasn't. It was pig-headed stubbornness that we were not going to accept this, not just on our doorstep, but on anyone's doorstep. So what we did as a campaign was we checked where all the licence areas were for fracking sites to extract natural gas. And then we went into every one of those areas and had a public meeting a bit like this. And unlike the people here who are clearly already engaged on all things climate and you're already active in your community, we were going into communities that had no real necessary interest in the climate or what fracking was going to do and were very uninformed on it. But what we found happened very quickly was that once you did give people the facts rather than the myths that were being proffered by the natural gas companies themselves, that they could see very quickly that their air and water was going to be at risk, and that meant that their children's health would be at risk. And this very quickly turned into a movement. We didn't control anything, but we went from 3 groups to 400 groups in the country. And everywhere that they tried to go with these licenses, they were met by walls of people. Even if it was only 6 people in the community or 600, they were met by them. And on top of that, as the movement, we all supported each other. So when we did 1,000 days of protest at Preston New Road, and it was quite brutal at times, you know, there was a lot of, I mean, we've got kids today, so there was a lot of like police around and things just to keep us all on track. And so it could be really difficult and you would be really despondent on some days. But then someone like Gillian would walk up the hill with a crew of people from up here. And it made all the difference, that supporting of other groups. And so we used to call it the unwelcome gift of truth when we gave the talks in the community, because it was something that made you feel really guilty when you were giving the talk, because I'd look at the faces, and these were people who didn't know what was coming and were probably quite content. And you knew that by the end of the evening they would recognise the truth and be unable to walk away from it. Because what can you do if someone tells you that the health and well-being of your children is at risk, and immediately in your location particularly? You can't just turn away and think, oh, you know what, someone else will take care of that, and go home, because, you know, once you know, you can't unknow this. What those in power need to see is that we are watching. That we are actually watching this time, and that we won't be fobbed off at the end by some spin doctor's lies. That we will respond and we will react. So we would ask that you get actively involved, not only in your local community, but you're already those sort of people, so wonderful. But also that never underestimate the power of your words in a letter. To your MPs, to your councillors, to the government, to the ministers involved. All of that actually matters. You know, I get lovely introductions like Gillian gave me because I've usually got a microphone and I stood at the front a lot. But the only thing that propelled the anti-fracking movement really was all those hundreds of thousands of residents who wrote the letters and forced the government to pay attention and to realise we were there and we weren't going anywhere, and we were going to keep on doing this until they stopped.